Thank you and welcome everyone to the UCLA Open special panel on aging, the aging landscape, emerging trends and changing perspectives. We're going to begin today by giving you a brief introduction to all of your panelists. We have 6 panelists today, including myself, who will be speaking to you about different areas of UCLA and work that is going on relating to aging in those fields. So our first panelist is Aisha Dixon. She is the director of the UCLA Emeriti and Retiree Relations Center. Next, we will have Dr. Fernando Torres Gil, professor in the Social Welfare and Public Policy Department, director, UCLA Center for Policy Research on Aging, and he is an author and he recently co-authored the book, The Politics of a Majority-Minority Nation, Aging, Diversity, and Immigration. Next up, we'll have Dr. Paul Su. He is adjunct professor in epidemiology at the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health. He is also the faculty coordinator for the UCLA Cluster Program for the Aging Cluster. Next up, we'll have Monica Moore. She is the community health manager for the Mary S. Easton Center for Alzheimer's Disease Research at UCLA. Then we will be speaking with Deanne Morris, the Associate Director of Generation Xchange Program, a division of geriatrics in the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. And finally, I will close out our presentations. My name is Anousheh Shayestehpour, and I am the director of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at UCLA, and I will also be moderating your questions at the end of the presentations. So we're going to begin with our first speaker. Aisha Dixon, as I mentioned, is the director of the Emeriti and Relations Center. And I'm sorry, the Emeriti and Retirees Relations Center. She came to UCLA in 2019 and has been involved in both the private and the public center, dedicated to the advocacy, civic engagement, and program development in the field of aging for the last 10 years. In addition to focusing on positive aging, Aisha believes in fostering community and that those who have served the university should continue to have the support of the university. She enjoys creating innovative programming such as intergenerational events, therapeutic art initiatives, and community-centered events. Aisha holds a Master of Public Administration as well as a Master of Gerontology from the University of Southern California. I will allow Aisha to, of course, explain more about the Emeriti and Retirees Relations Center, but a brief overview. The UCLA Emeriti and Retirees Relations Center serves retired faculty and staff communities through advocacy, education, and personalized services pre and post-retirement. With that being said, I will hand it off to Aisha to share more.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here on this amazing panel. We were saying before the webinar started, I feel honored and that it's come full circle because Dr. Torres Gil was my professor at USC many, many moons ago. So it's an honor to be working with him as we talk about the aging landscape. So let's dive right in, the aging landscape. Of course, as you all know, it's multidimensional. So what does that really mean? So it's participatory in the workforce. And for that, we mean something like financial. With a lack of proper pension planning, retirement is sometimes not something people can see themselves doing. And they continue to work because they cannot afford to retire. So the fallout from the 2008 financial crisis, student debt, or their children's debt can also make people postpone their retirement. People are also living longer and they're healthier. Despite what you might see in the news, people are generally living longer and their life expectancy is also increased. And also talent shortage. This is the trifecta of people in the workforce being older. When people are not taking traditional jobs that our older generation has, they are changing because of automation. People have jobs that are just focusing on social media and being a YouTube celebrity or a YouTube influencer and things like that that are changing the structure of the workforce as we know it today. This also comes into play when you think of how millennials or people in the baby boomer generation see their employment. A lot of times millennials will see that they need a job that has purpose. They want to be able to change the world. Whereas some boomers might feel they just want a job that gives them joy, that they're being productive and that they're able to contribute to the means and also the mission of the company that they're with. Also, active societal engagement. And this is doing with people often associate social media or lack of engagement to do something with decline in their cognition. People are often engaged in activities or their community that has activities that keeps them physical, that keeps their mental and their emotional health well. And older adults are being able to be included and not have those negative stereotypes about isolation and being secluded from things that are going on in the world. Then there's also policy development. So this has a lot to do with advocacy, whether it's poverty, income security. A lot of times things are in place and policies are projected for expected outcomes, whereas the actual practice, such as long-term care supportive services or strategies to prevent elder abuse, they focus on the bigger picture rather than the actual situation of preventing neglect or people who have food insecurities. This also is something where policy development, we need to start advancing more of the economic security of older adults and those who do have food insecurity. And last, aging in place. We all want to live with dignity and independence for as long as we can. And with better coordination and integration of healthcare and supportive services, this is something that we all can achieve to live comfortably and safely at home as long as we can. So you might hear a lot about the Age-Friendly University Network today. What this is, it's an initiative launched in 2012, and an age-friendly university promotes inclusion of all retired and older adults in a healthy and active way throughout multi-generational initiatives and promoting a positive social environment on campus for older adults. In 2018, through a colleague of mine, Professor Sarkisian, in our David Geffen School of Medicine, and ourselves here at the Emeriti Retirees Relations Center, we have our core purpose of providing activities and programs and webinars such as this to serve as a connecting link for people at every stage of life. Nowadays, especially, there are older students, there are older staff and faculty that need to be included in their everyday life on campus. And our role with an age-friendly university is ever changing. We've had to slow down because of the pandemic in some of our initiatives, but we are still evolving in programs such as this, as becoming a leader in the age-friendly university initiative. Okay, so next are the emerging trends that we're going to talk about today. So we're going to redefine aging for the 21st century and talk about age-positive innovations and the U shape of happiness. And finally, I'll touch base on ageism, especially when it comes to social media and pop culture, how ageism is reflected in our day-to-day lives, and we may not even know it, but it's definitely there. So, redefining aging for the 21st century. The experience of reaching an old age can be better or worse depending on your culture. Cross-cultural differences and perceptions of aging is often derived from familial relations, religious or stereotypical beliefs. During the pandemic, especially the past 20 some odd months, there were lots of multi-generational family households. And as I mentioned earlier, aging is multi-dimensional and people are living longer, and some older adults are having second careers. And even because of the pandemic and even before the pandemic, a lot of older adults are raising their grandchildren, or they're being supportive of their children who might need the extra step with grandma taking care of their loved one and their grandchild. So how do we have aging become something where it's not a bad word, and it's increasing the knowledge and the expertise of not only the workforce, but our day-to-day life in the 21st century. When people think of older adults, they bring together with them their background, their years of service when it comes to different positions at companies. So how do we then break the barriers of aging in the 21st century? And I would love this to be kind of like a moment to ask maybe the other panelists if they have any ideas as to how we can redefine aging. It's not something where one size fits all, but we have to figure out how to break these barriers when it comes to living longer and how we see aging in our society. So please feel free to type something in the chat or ask a question. But this was something that once we get towards the end, we can have an open dialogue about breaking these barriers. So age positivity, using more age positive language and innovations. These can be designed with aging and the lifespan in mind. A lot of these initiatives need to be coordinated with intergenerational spaces, communities, and also multi-generational initiatives. Earlier in my career, I did multi-generational and intergenerational programming where I would have students of various ages meet with older adults and either read stories or have some sort of dialogue and conversation, even mentoring or resume building, because the older generation can teach a lot of the younger generation what they've learned throughout their life course, and vice versa. We can have a lot of the younger generation share some of the new things that are out there that will help people age well and age better. Some of the things that we need as far as age positivity is transportation. That needs to meet a variety of accessibility needs, including the possibility of having older adults in the planning and the developmental processes of transportation or various other community structures. So maintaining optimism about the aging process. This is when people need to speak positively about promoting the quality of life and also engaging in lifelong learning opportunities. We need to be more happy and engaged, and the happiness U curve is something where people generally kind of fall into a slump in their 30s, 40s, but around their 50s, people in their biological and cognitive changes and also their life experiences can result in them being more compassionate. They're more comfortable with their self in their own skin. And people generally start focusing on life in the present. And that's where this U-shaped kind of paradox happens, because people are living longer and their life expectancy has given them a sense of gratitude as to being where they are in their life and living in the moment. And also, classes like this, where we're talking about life expectancy and we're talking about people living longer. It's something that we are only bringing the age positivity to the forefront and having people integrate the aging life course into a daily discussion. Getting older and longevity is something that we should be talking more about and have more courses on, so that younger generations understand what it's like to get older. How can you put yourself in someone else's shoes in a different generation? Next up is ageism. Ageism within the media and popular culture. So at this first sentence, I remember hearing about it in a TED Talk. Ageism is prejudice against our future selves. And I will say that one more time. Ageism is prejudice against our future selves. So hearing this on a TED Talk years ago, it's always stuck in my head, because when you're watching TV or you're listening to the radio, we often hear ads and media portraying getting older as an anti-aging cream, or people being impaired or having dementia or crotchety, or described as being over the hill or grumpy. And we need to sort of change the language and again, have that sort of age positive representation. And we can't change the bias unless we are aware of it. When I still see ads now about all these anti-aging creams, it's just, it boggles my mind that this has gone through a marketing department and was approved to be so negative and anti. But as our attitudes shift over time, I think some of the language would also change. I know I've heard recent terms of people being called a silver fox or a silver vixen. So it's putting a positive spin on getting older, albeit I'm not super thrilled with, I feel like, the hypersexualization of a silver fox or a vixen, but it is a small change that is happening. So along with ageism, removing these barriers and how we can aid older adults in transferring their existing skills or adding opportunities to keep learning and to keep educating themselves. And I know we get a lot of that with the extension at UCLA. It's a lifelong learning, and that's the language that we need to keep using, because people are often lumped into these generational cohorts. If they're a silent generation or they're boomers or they're millennials, they're not seen as individual people. They are seen as this group of cohorts, and they're all the same, and I'm just going to bundle them all together. So we need to remove those barriers so that we can be able to see what people are actually representing and how that person is speaking for themselves, not a full generation as a whole. So when it comes to generating representation for inclusive and realistic aging, this is something where, for example, when people think of leaving a position or getting rid of someone or someone retiring, it kind of reminds me of the Netflix series called The Chair. And in the Netflix series, The Chair, it's about a departmental head having to get rid of some of their older staff who they feel is having too much money, too much salary, and they're bringing in a younger generation of faculty because the older adults have already had their turn. And that's kind of seen as stereotypical because with ageism, it can be seen in a couple of different ways. For example, with this definition, institutional, which perpetuates ageism because the coordination of service delivery systems isn't always integrated, and it's not always easy to access. When it comes to how the pandemic has been this past 2 years, people have had digital literacy issues, or they live in a rural population where they can't access the internet, or they're not able to fully understand how to navigate telehealth medicine. So that institutional ageism is present because people cannot access these different systems that they need to live a healthy life. And then also there's opportunities for people to miss employment. If you're looking for that second act career and you have to go online to do an application or submit a bunch of things online, it's hard to train a workforce that did not utilize these different applications, and things should be more inclusive to reach the aging population for the workforce environment. The second type of ageism is interpersonal, which has only been highlighted by social isolation during this past couple of years in COVID. As I mentioned, people have issues with digital access and also being highly victimized of cyber crimes because they've always been targeted at older adults. And especially when everything's online and this webinar is online, it's hard for older adults to not be targeted with this ageism because of social media and cyber crimes. So these realistic expectations are important because we need to further examine this part of the life cycle. Negative attributes on social media or things that are highly caricaturized only tell the world that aging is something that we have to dread or that we're going to be a burden on our loved ones and our family. And you see that so often in social media. And the best we could do is to try to change that narrative and become more positive with the language so that we are having positive reinforcements and not showcasing our older population as a burden or as something that's just, you know, completely over cartooned in the way that it's represented on TV and social media. And with that, I think I can turn it over now to Dr. Torres Gil. Should I pause the presentation?
Well, if you don't mind, Dr. Torres, I'd like to introduce you before you begin. Thank you so much, Ayesha, for starting us off. I appreciate that. And we've got some questions in the chat that we'll definitely circle back to, including your question about how do we break down barriers. Mm-hmm. So we're going to move to our second speaker now, who's going to speak on behalf of the UCLA Center for Policy Research on Aging. He is the director of that center, and Dr. Torres Gil is also a professor of social welfare and an adjunct professor of gerontology at USC, as well as a professor at UCLA. He has served as associate dean and acting dean at the UCLA School of Public Affairs, and most recently was the chair of the Social Welfare Department. He has written 6 books and over 100 publications, and his research spans important topics of health and long-term care, disability, entitlement reform, and the politics of aging. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Dr. Torres Gil because he has a very impressive portfolio of public service and is a leading spokesperson on demographics, aging, and public policy. He has received 3 presidential appointments under Clinton and Obama, and was appointed by President Clinton and the Senate as the first ever U.S. Assistant Secretary on Aging in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. At the state level, he was appointed by former Governor Gray Davis to the Governor's Blue Ribbon Task Force on Veterans Homes, and by Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger as a delegate to the 2005 White House Conference on Aging. Dr. Torres Gil, who was born and raised in Salinas, California, is the son of migrant farm workers. He earned his MSW, Master's in Social Work, and PhD in Social Policy, Planning, and Research from the Heller Graduate School in Social Policy and Management at Brandeis University. So with that being said, I will hand the mic to you, Dr. Torres Gil.
Thank you very much. And please forgive me for mispronouncing your name, but Anousheh, you've done a great job bringing us all together. And Ayesha, I am so impressed with your presentation and your expertise. And I just learned something that was just so valuable. Ageism is prejudice against our future self. May I borrow that and run with it?
Sure. I mean, I owe you for giving me, I think, maybe an A or B in class.
Well, Ayesha, you and I think at least one other member here, we are what I proudly refer to as truants, recognizing that we have 2 great universities in Los Angeles, California, and USC and UCLA are 2 of the top universities in aging, gerontology, and geriatrics, alongside Johns Hopkins and Harvard. So for those of us in the Southern California region, we are so fortunate to have the tremendous expertise in aging at UCLA and at USC. So take full advantage of it, as Ayesha has done. But it's a pleasure to be here with our distinguished group. And I'd like to give a particular shout out to Dr. Xu, who heads up the aging cluster. I'm sure he'll talk about that, but this is something that no university had done until UCLA focused on undergraduate education and using gerontology as a framework for examining the multiple issues in higher education, in a liberal education, showing that aging is a great prism for multiple arenas and sectors and issues that affect all of us. And the aging cluster has been a tremendous success. And Dr. Su leads that. And so I'm sure he'll say a few more things about it. But in either event, it's a pleasure to be here for my part before I head out. On a personal note, I'm heading up to Northern California, Monterey County. My eldest aunt, 92 years of age, fell and broke her hip earlier this week. And the doctors at the hospital were debating whether or not it was worth investing in medical intervention and providing and doing a very serious hip replacement, hip repair, thinking that she's had heart issues, she's had a stroke, she's 92 years old. Is it worth spending our expertise, technology, staff time on this elder person? Her children, my cousins, prevailed. She went through the surgery successfully, and to everyone's great surprise, by the second day, she was up and around in her walker. She's now home. So what does that say? First of all, ageism, sadly, is alive and well. And during the pandemic, we had to deal with what we call critical care standards, personal care standards, which refer to hospitals when they're overloaded with COVID patients are allowed to decide who lives, who dies, who should have intensive ICU, oxygen, ventilators, who shouldn't. Initially, when it started in California, the state health department had age as the criteria. If you're 92 years of age, you catch COVID, you go to the back of the line. We'll save our limited hospital care for younger persons. We, thanks to our governor here in California, successfully fought against those kind of standards that were based on ageism. And I might add, also based on ableism. So I just say that because it brings out that we all have to step up, address the issues that Ayesha has laid out so well, but it's also about public policy and the politics of aging, which is my arena, which is what I study, which is what I've been involved with on a personal, professional, and political level through my various appointments at the federal level and at the local and state level. At the moment, I am a member of the governor's master plan on aging here in California. And for all of us that hope to grow old in this great state that are already older adults, we're fortunate to be in California because the master plan on aging brought all the stakeholders that have an interest, a commitment to aging, whether from the public or private sector, the unions, the experts, the university, the trade groups, the medical, long-term care folks, and they all came up with a consensus of what we need to do to better prepare California to be age-friendly, whether it's healthcare, long-term care, housing, transportation, a myriad of recommendations. And the good news with the state surplus, our governor has provided billions of dollars so that we can implement these many recommendations. So at least in California, it's a good place to age. Yes, it's expensive. Yes, it's crowded, but we are what's known as a service-rich state. And it always puzzles me when my baby boomer friends that have built their lives in California, have lots of equity in their homes, and we see this in the Bay Area, in Los Angeles. They'll sell their home for $1.5 million, which they probably bought for 100,000 30 years ago. And then they'll move to Arizona or Texas or Nevada, which are decent states, but they don't recognize a fundamental issue about the aging process. As we grow older, we will need to have more supportive services, especially in health, medical, and home and community-based long-term care. Those things cost money. Nevada, Arizona, Texas do not provide those kind of services. Texas and Arizona don't even provide the Affordable Care Act, have very limited, minimal Medicaid. And so my friends go there, boomers, when they hit their 70s, 80s, 90s, they're gonna ask themselves, where are the long-term care services? Where is my doctor? Will they accept my Medicare? And what we find, as we found with those in the Northeast that went to Florida, many Californians will want to come back to California because here is where the services and the expertise lie. Of course, whether they can afford to come back is another story. So this is all a way of saying, let's invest in making California a truly age-friendly state, where we know we can age with the measure of services and a quality of life. At the federal level, just to share some of what my book is about, and thank you for mentioning it, a few trends at the federal level, national level. First of all, we are living off the legacy of the greatest generation, in particular, the advocates back in the 1930s and the 1960s. They gave us our first social safety net and entitlement programs based on age. And of course, that's Social Security and its many different parts, Medicare, Medicaid, the Old Americans Act, but also supplemental security income, disability insurance, a host of volunteer programs, subsidized housing and transit services. And we have a great deal of debt that we owe for that greatest generation that fought hard in the 30s, all the way to the 60s, even 70s, to give us that social safety net, those social insurance programs. For those of us that are baby boomers, and I'm proud to say I'm a 73-year-old, and I love my age, I own my age, we are living off of their work. And the real question is, what will become of those programs? Will the voters continue to support them? Will they feel they're too expensive? Will they begin to diminish them? What might replace it? And that's one of the great debates that's occurring at the federal level, in the media, among the various political parties, among the various advocacy groups. Do we continue to raise taxes for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid? Do we restructure them? Do we expand them to be universal programs, maybe make Medicare a healthcare for all? Or do we further means test them as we're doing now with Medicare, where with limited resources, we begin to limit the benefits to those that are vulnerable or those that are low income? So we will have, over the next 5-10 years, some critical debates about the future of those legacy programs. Keep them, eliminate them, restructure them, reform them, add more benefits, take away benefits. So that's one of the big debates that's occurring in the media, in the Congress, at the national level. And it will impact all of us, and certainly it will impact my generation. But the other debate goes to younger cohorts, as Ayesha has brought out so well. Younger cohorts now need to ask themselves their own question. What do we want as we grow older? And do we want to rely on the federal government and public benefits as we have in the past and up to this point in time? Or do we expect greater personal, individual responsibility? And there will be proposals to make Social Security more of an investment program. We had those proposals in the 1980s, 1990s with President Bush, the two President Bushes. And I'm sorry to say, there's a lot of support among Gen X and millennials for making Social Security voluntary, allowing individuals to keep their FICA taxes and use them for other purposes or invest them. So the real question is, will we see greater individual personal responsibility for younger cohorts as they grow older? Or will these younger cohorts continue to support and maybe recognize the value of these social insurance programs? So that's a lot of the debate. I certainly have my own views, very strong views, but that's not really necessary, I think, for my presentation. But suffice to say, in the politics of aging, we will have to come to terms in the relatively near future about what we expect from government as we grow older. And of course, many gerontologists will point out that even with what we have, there are huge gaps. We don't have long-term care. We don't have support for caregivers. And there's a huge gap, and there's a lot of out-of-pocket expenses, even in the Medicare program. And the Medicaid program itself is going to have its own issues. So that's part of it. But there's a whole nother issue that's going to play into the aging of the population and the role of government and the role of individuals in the private sector. And that's going to be another demographic trend, the growing diversity of the United States. That's much of the debates around issues of refugees, immigrants, the wall, bilingual education, driver's licenses for undocumented persons. Much of those debates are about the growing diversity of the United States, which by 2040, at the earliest, will make the United States, for the first time in its almost 300-year history, a nation where no one group is in the majority, and that non-Hispanic whites will continue to decline as a proportion of the population, and that a combination of African Americans, Latinos, Asians, Asian Pacific Islanders, immigrants, Native Americans, for the first time in this country's history, will be a majority minority society. So that brings out all kinds of issues about inclusivity and how do we create a common agenda, and how do we ensure that the constitutional democracy is adhered to by all groups, whether they're third generation Latinos and African Americans, or recent refugees from the wars in the Middle East, or whether they're Central Americans coming in as undocumented persons. We have to deal with all these issues. The good news is the United States has, for its full 250, 300 years, we've constantly debated these issues. But what has really engendered our ability to get through it is the United States has always had a welcome mat for immigrants and diversity. Of course, we go through a lot of changes, whether you were Irish or German or Chinese or Eastern European or Jewish. Every group has gone through, will I be accepted? How do I become American? How do I keep my history and my culture? If we can continue that tradition of being patient, understanding, and ultimately welcoming this diversity, then we can continue that successful experiment. So what does it have to do with aging? And here is where I like to speak to conservative older retirees, whether they're in the Midwest, in the Southeast, in Orange County, in Riverside, in the San Joaquin Valley. And I like to talk to these groups and their programs. I always accept their invitations because I like to bring out the relevance of immigration and diversity to their aging. And many of them aren't comfortable with this dramatic change in race and languages, etc. But ultimately, I just pose one question. Who will pay the taxes for your Social Security, your Medicare, your pension plan? Who will contribute to the nation's economy to ensure that your retirement savings remain solvent and they're not lost through some kind of bankruptcy? And I respond with first, non-Hispanic whites are not only declining as a proportion to the population, their life expectancy is declining and they're having far fewer children. The future workforce will be the children of the ethnic minority populations that are relatively young today, and any immigrant refugee groups which we continue to bring in or allow to come to this country. So ultimately, I say to my audiences, however you feel about the diversity, and there's reasons to feel uncomfortable, I understand that. We need these workers for the future economy and to sustain whatever public benefits it is we want, we demand, and will vote for as an electorate. So we have all that together. And ultimately, I'll go back to my aunt who just came out of the hospital. It's best to reveal these dilemmas and the ultimate solution with long-term care, home and community-based services. We are going to face a huge shortage of caregivers, and those who will work in nursing homes, long-term care facilities, board and care homes, in-home supportive services, because they tend to be minority, immigrant, and women, low-income women. And because we've shut the door on immigrants and refugees in the last couple of years, there are far fewer of them available in the long-term care workforce. Fortunately, my aunt has a large family. Her children and grandchildren are there to take care of her, to keep her in her home. But if she had to go to a skilled nursing facility or rehab facility, there's a huge shortage of individuals that are willing to work in these places for $15 an hour, no health insurance, and that care enough to do so. Unfortunately, or fortunately, these kind of workers now find that they'll get more money going to McDonald's or In-N-Out and working there for $18, $19 an hour than for the $15 working in a long-term care type facility. Fortunately, my aunt has her family, but if she didn't, she would be in a substandard Medicaid long-term care facility with low-paid staff, understaffed. And that's where we need this diversity, and there's where we need immigrants. So I will end with that and simply say, I'm excited about the future of aging. There are so many possibilities with our expanded lifespan, or the potential to have an expanded lifespan, and hopefully commensurate with health span, meaning that we take care of each other. But I will end with this. I am now moving more into child welfare. I'm not moving away from aging, but I'm focusing more on kids and young persons and young students. Why? Because in a majority minority society, the under 50 population is heavily minority, ethnic, and immigrant. And therefore we have to ask ourselves, are we investing in their healthcare? Are we investing in their education? Are we investing in their training? In our master plan on aging, we incorporated an equity lens and an intergenerational, interracial, interethnic lens, because we realized right up front that it's no longer about providing benefits to older persons like myself at 73. Increasingly, it's providing healthcare and better education for the 5-year-olds, the 10-year-olds, the high school students, the junior college kids, addressing issues like the dramatic increase in obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes among young Black and Brown communities. So for those of us interested in aging and in better services for older adults like myself, let's also now incorporate that intergenerational, interracial, interethnic lens so that we can ensure that younger, diverse populations, Black and Brown communities, also have the opportunity to grow old and have a good long life in this great state we call California. Thank you very much. It's been an honor to be with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Torres Gil. We really appreciate that. And unfortunately, Dr. Torres Gil won't be able to stay with us until the very end of the panel, but we very much appreciate you sharing your expertise with us while we have you. And this is an excellent transition as well to Dr. Sue. As you mentioned, the younger generation and investing in the younger generation, I'd like to invite Dr. Paul Sue to pull up his slideshow and talk about the UCLA Aging Cluster focused on frontiers in human aging. So I will go ahead and give you all a little background on Dr. Paul Sue. Paul, could you please advance to the slide with your introduction? Thank you so much. So the UCLA Cluster Program is a year-long program that people talk about some more, but let me tell you about him. So Dr. Paul Sue has served in various capacities on the CDC and NIH-funded projects in fields as varied as occupational medicine, injury prevention, and health disparities. Dr. Sue has explored and documented health patterns and trends among large, diverse populations, including health and injury profiles for various age and racial and ethnic groups in collaboration with other investigators. His original training is in mechanical engineering, along with subsequent training in epidemiology, to help him understand the complex systems and disease mechanisms that we face. He has taught for the Masters of Public Health program, as well as the undergraduates in the public health minor at UCLA over the last 15 years. He also serves as faculty lead, as I mentioned, on Cluster 80, which is the Frontiers in Human Aging cluster. Dr. Su, I will hand it off to you. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me? Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
So thank you so much for allowing me to be on this panel. It's definitely an honor to be able to share the stage with such a diverse group. And before I start, I wanted to actually thank Dr. Torres Gil for your kind words about the cluster. He neglected to mention that he's actually been a long-time guest lecturer for over 20 years now. He has been consistently coming to our class to present a guest lecture on aging policies. So we really appreciate the support, Dr. Torres Gil. We've been talking a little bit about the clusters. I wanted to kind of just do a quick intro. You know, it's when people first hear the term aging cluster, is it a bunch of, you know, older folks getting together and hanging out? Not quite. So we're actually part of a larger cluster program, year-long set of classes. Most classes at UCLA, of course, are quarter to quarter, 10 weeks, pretty quick actually. So one of the cluster program all the different clusters are actually year-long sets. They take all 3 quarters in a series, and they're multidisciplinary. They talk about big ideas, so aging, of course, food, evolution. I think we have one on political violence this year. And it's actually just for freshmen. So it's only open to first-year students. And it's a way to kind of give them a cohort that they can take these courses together. We're trying to establish this learning community. And so we've found over the years that there's been some really, really good outcomes. I mentioned the learning community earlier. And it really helps them transition because instead of, you know, a new set of classmates every 10 weeks, it's the same cohort for the whole first year. And we found within our own internal metrics, analytics, they graduate on time, they have a higher GPA compared to the rest of their cohort or the rest of the freshmen. And as I mentioned, you know, food, evolution, and of course, our cluster, Frontiers in Human Aging. A little bit more about the cluster itself or about our specific aging cluster itself. As I mentioned, multidisciplinary faculty. My training is in epidemiology. We have another faculty member from the School of Social Work and someone from immunology who's doing the bio side of it. And I think earlier in the chat, I noticed some really great things that I think we can definitely come back and talk about. But I think Judy mentioned something about including ageism, perhaps in some of the diversity and inclusion curriculum. And I would love to make that part of maybe at even the high school level, because our class is an elective. It's not a required course. So yes, there is some self-selection. Students who are in this course, you know, have chosen it because they have an interest in aging. But it would be great to somehow be able to expose more students, perhaps even at a younger level, not just at the undergrad level, to some of these concepts. I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but some of the things that we talk about very briefly, we do the life course perspective, right? Events add up over time. So something that happens during childhood, I know Dr. Torres Gil mentioned child welfare, right? Making sure that we take care of the kids to have them or be able to support them to actively age. And people think, you know, active aging, well, that only happens after, you know, and I don't want to unintentionally reveal my implicit biases, right? So active aging doesn't just occur at 40, 50, 60, right? It occurs throughout the lifetime, right? All those things do add up. We also introduce them to the biopsychosocial perspective, and it's basically the overlap, the intersection of all these different arenas, right? In class, we have guest faculty who come in and talk about, you know, what's happening at the cellular level, what's happening with their telomerase, right? There's the psychology side, there's the social side. I think Ayesha talked a lot about the cultural aspects of aging. And as we'll do, I think we have a time to do a little bit of a quick exercise to kind of just try to reveal some of those social or cultural attitudes. one of their very first assignments is actually, they have to do a paper on ageism. And we specifically try to get them to reflect on their attitudes. And there's actually been a fair amount of research in this area. There are actual health outcomes that are related to ageism. What do I mean by that? If you have ageist attitudes, which can be measured by different types of surveys, if you have a negative or have an ageist attitude, and this goes for both older adults and younger folks, there are negative health outcomes that are associated with some of those attitudes. Higher cardiovascular events, response to stress for older adults, worse health behavior sometimes, depending on the level of the attitude. So let me see if I can pull up the chat still. I was able to see it earlier. I was hoping to have the audience respond to this question. And this is the same exact question that we give to the students on the very first day of class. We ask them, when does someone get old? At what age does someone become old? And I know everyone's going to be really careful with their responses, but it's okay. Just throw some numbers. It'll stimulate the conversation. Oh, wow, 85, never. I like it. We would call that social ageism or social age when they feel old. I'll introduce you to all the different ways we measure age, right? Good. I mean, so when they become inflexible. Love it. So clearly this is a very well-informed group. I'm not sure I want to reveal now what the students say when we ask them this question. So when we get a fair number of variation in their responses too, but the one common number that comes up is 40, right? So of course, all the faculty look at each other and kind of, groan. But so at that age, that's what they say. I should record some of those lectures so you guys can hear some of the responses. I think it's close to their parents' age, and I think they conceptualize or think of their parents as being older. So, but 40, 45, 50, that's what comes out. Now remember, these are first year students, they're 18. And that's why it's so important to be able to expose them to some of these concepts that we talk about. So this kind of leads me to the next question: how do we measure age? Right? All these things that we've been using. So what's great is some of the responses have been using chronology, time, right? 40, 50, 85, 72, right? Adrian, 73. So what is that actually? Right? If we think about that a little bit, that's just how many, times the Earth has revolved around the sun, right? Why didn't we, and actually there are still some cultures that also use the lunar calendar, right? Why just focus on the solar calendar, right? So that's chronological aging. But how do we really, if we want to measure age, right? And unfortunately for many NIH studies, many epidemiologic studies, they're still using just that age as a criteria. 65 is a number that's often used, right? But even where did that number come from? It's typically the age at which you become eligible for many of these programs. So, right, and what's funny about that age is, if you, some of you probably know the history of Social Security, 65, when they first established it, back in 1935, I believe. Does anybody happen to know what the life expectancy back in 1935 was? You don't have to know the exact life expectancy. Was it higher or lower than 65? It's actually really close. It's actually lower than 65, just slightly lower. So the original designers of that program were actually really smart. They said, here's our average life expectancy. What age should we make people become eligible? So clearly, we've had a huge increase in life expectancy, right? Yeah, so exactly. Thank you, Adrian. So when it was enacted, it was lower than 65. So that tells us, well, tells us a couple of things. They were really smart when they created the program, right? Not if the average life expectancy is lower, then we won't have to have as many people when it comes time for benefits. But what is the life expectancy now? For men, high 70s, for women, low 80s, right? At least. So, and I know there's some variation there by gender and different race ethnic group, but right, clearly, many of the things that Dr. Torres Gill brought up is something that we're going to definitely have to address, right? Everyone now, on average, is living over the age of eligibility. So, but coming back to how we measure age, we've been using chronological age. But what was really nice to see in some of the comments, you know, as young as you feel, when you feel you're old, right? So we would say that's social age. There's also biological age, right? Just because someone's a certain age means their biology might be a little bit different. And especially if somebody's active or even athletes, right? Or a smoker, their lungs are going to be quite a different age than the rest of their organs potentially. So as you can see, definitely different ways to measure aging. There's cognitive age, right? Functional age. The functional age is related to the biological age. So we've always measured age by just using chronology. And I think Adrian has mentioned that already too. You know, we simply been using just chronological age as a criteria, right? So, but this is something that we introduce to students on the very first day of class, trying to get them to think about some of these things. I think Ayesha posed a question earlier, you know, how do we break down some of these barriers? And education, I think, is a big part of that. And, you know, it's not education just for younger students, older adults too, making, you know, sure that they're aware of opportunities that are out there, maybe any implicit ageism on their own, right, from their own perspective. So some of the other assignments that we have them do, we have them do a film review. You know, I think Aisha also mentioned portrayals in the media. We give them a list of films. They have to choose a film and then identify a scene with ageism or some of the other aging concepts that we've introduced. Maybe a good example of active aging, a good example of person environmental press, you know, life course perspective, so on and so forth. So I think we try really hard to make sure the students are exposed, right, to all of these different things and being able to identify, being able to see, you know, portrayals of ageism or other aging related concepts in the media, specifically in films. And then the last, one of the other assignments or things that we have the students do is something called service learning. And I'd like to spend the next probably a few minutes just talking a little bit about that. Some of you might have heard of service learning before. It's a little bit different from volunteering. It's this overlap of academics, reflection, and of course the service part. I think it's different from volunteering because typically volunteering doesn't have the academic background. And what that is we're trying to, obviously we've introduced the students to all these theories, all these concepts, both, you know, biologically based or culturally based. And we want them to identify that when they go out and actually perform service learning. There's also a reflection component. We ask them to do a journal. So every week there are specific prompts that they have to answer and reflect on. And then of course the service part is where they're going out into the community. And our service learning program, of course, is geared towards older adults. But I want to point out that service learning as a concept is not just specifically for older adults. It's to be engaged in the community. And I'll come back and talk about that part too. But of course, since our clusters on aging, our service learning is also focused on older adults. Pre-pandemic, I just wanted to finish up service learning. This was a quote from the original, one of the founders of the service learning program. Combined with learning, adds value to each and transforms both, which was something I really liked. So pre-pandemic, we actually had students going out into the community. We would partner, we had multiple partners with different older adult organizations in the community, One Generation, Belmont Village, trying to think. So these were all organizations, community organizations that are focused on serving older adults. And our students would be assigned to these groups, and they would go for, I think 3-4 hours a week, and actually perform service. And that could be anything really from interacting with older adults to helping them with meals, so on and so forth. Pretty much, whatever the organization needed. But one of the things that we definitely emphasize is that obviously it's intergenerational, and we really want them to engage. We want it to be an interactive process. Obviously, during the pandemic, we had to kind of switch gears a little bit. We went to a hybrid model, to a virtual model. So a lot of the interaction, actually the majority of the interaction was on Zoom. And now we're able to come back a little bit to the in-person model. And for this, from the students' side, there have been really well-documented outcomes on attitudes. They get more self-confidence. They're more positive towards school, definitely more engaged, enhances their social skills, public speaking, communications, and of course, academic performance. So we've really been pleased, and actually I'm really grateful to all the organizations that we've partnered with over the years too. They allow our students to come into their organization and give us this opportunity to interact with their older adults. So what are some implications? What are some things that we can go on towards the future? Even though our cluster is specifically focused on aging, as I mentioned, service learning itself can be, does not have to be focused on just students necessarily. So maybe some modification of the program, I think that's something that could be done for different cohorts. So definitely not just for students. And as I mentioned, there starting to be this, I think, awareness that the interaction, the community engagement is really, really important. So whether that's, and I think several folks have already mentioned the intergenerational aspect, right? Whether that's with older adults or with other projects such as, with somebody from film or from dance or one of the other performing arts, there's definitely additional opportunities for intergenerational engagement. Talked a little bit about it already. And I actually kind of just wanted to acknowledge really quickly Tony, who's the director of the overall cluster program, all my cluster co-faculty, without which the cluster would not run. The teaching fellows, they're the ones, the TAs who help out with the students, and of course the students themselves. These are the ones who are passionate or at least curious about aging, and they're the ones who sign up for the class and make the class possible. And so I think hopefully you've gotten a feel a little bit for just from the educational aspect, what we've been trying to do to, at a minimum, expose the students to ageism, ableism, which I think was mentioned earlier. Just some of the aging concepts and theories, and just the policy issues too. We tell them about Social Security and that they need to vote, right? They need to participate, be more civically engaged if they want to have a say. As I think Dr. Torres Gill mentioned, if they want to say in how these programs are going to turn out. Are they willing to increase taxes on themselves, to be able to support their older adults or to support their parents and grandparents? So I'll leave you with that. I think just one last quick thought. It actually, when I first started, I was not super optimistic about, you always saw so much, I think, and it's even now, especially polarization, ageism itself. And I think a lot of comments, how ingrained it is in our society, many programs, it's just really, really built in. And, how do we work on that? Well, I think having interacted with these students, it's definitely made me more optimistic. They're really passionate and they're really great. So from last year, that's my email. Welcome to contact me if you have any questions. But from last year, one of our older adults who was part of the service learning, this is Audrey Stein, and and Grace Tan, one of our students, they had such a wonderful relationship that after, or when we were allowed to come back on campus, because all their interaction was only on Zoom, they actually set up a date and met up on campus for lunch. And they were kind enough to share this picture with us. So I think that's what definitely makes me optimistic. So I'll finish right there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Su. And I love seeing all these connections we're making at UCLA, because Audrey is actually an instructor for our program as well. So one of my goals with this event today was to connect us even more so. And so it's great to see how we're all already finding ways to work with one another. And on that note, I think this is a good time for a very quick break. If you need to stretch your legs or grab a drink or a beverage, let's return in about 4 minutes. And that way we can make sure we have time for the last 3 presenters, as well as some discussion with the panel. So I will suggest that we begin again. It's 2:09. Let's begin around 2:13 p.m. So welcome back to the second hour of our panel event today. We have 3 presenters left. We're going to begin the second hour with Monica Moore. Monica, thank you so much. Let me go ahead and introduce everyone to Monica. Monica is the Community Health Program Manager for the Mary S. Easton Center for Alzheimer's Disease Research at UCLA. She's also the co-director of the Training and Education Activities portion of UCLA's California Alzheimer's Disease Center. She has worked in the field of aging and Alzheimer's disease for 20 years, focusing on community education and outreach and caregiver support. She holds a master's degree in gerontology from the California State University of Long Beach and a certificate in gerontology from Sonoma State University. And with that being said, I'm going to pass the mic to Monica, and thank you for sharing your presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to be able to be a part of such a wealth of knowledge in terms of the other participants. It's a true honor to be able to share the stage, the virtual stage with everyone here today. So my angle that I'll be talking about today is a little bit different than everyone else. You know, my focus is Alzheimer's disease. And as we see, this is obviously, you know, impacting the aging of our community and the aging of our population. So the Easton Center, just very briefly, what our goal here at UCLA is to provide improved quality of life for patients as well as caregivers of people with dementia. We have a drug discovery lab. We have a clinical trials program where we're looking to develop new medications and treatments for Alzheimer's and other related conditions. And also we want to support research to better understand Alzheimer's and related conditions. You know, this is a disease that ultimately they don't know that much about. So it's important to be able to know all of the different intricacies of this disease and how we can come up with interventions that will be able to help change the course of this disease in our society. Part of our mission is that we do provide free community education through our California Alzheimer's Disease Center grant. And so that is what allows me to be able to be here with all of you today. Here we go. Whoops. So my job, I do outreach and education. It's one of the key parts of raising awareness about Alzheimer's disease is telling people about it, you know, talking about stigmas, talking about the myths and the truths of Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. We go into lots of different communities here in Los Angeles. You know, our communities are as diverse as LA is. And, you know, we go and we talk to different populations about research, about caregiver health. And we also focus as well on caregiver support. People with Alzheimer's disease, their caregivers are so impacted by this disease. They're often the second victim of the disease. And we really want to be able to provide them with safe space of support. We do lots of these support groups with the Department of Geriatrics here at UCLA, and we're very grateful to them for supporting these efforts. And then again, through the state, again, as Dr. Torres Gil was saying, California is a great state to age, and we are the only state that actually has designated Alzheimer's disease centers. So there are 10 of us in the state of California, and we are directed to provide training, education, research, care for this population. We receive state funding for this to be able to really try to make a difference in terms of the world of Alzheimer's in California. Dr. Torres Gil mentioned the master plan on aging that we have one of our CADC representatives is in fact on that as well. So our role at the Easton Center, we're small here at UCLA, but we really reach a large population across the state, and also looking at our focus here in Los Angeles. And so one thing I like to talk about, no matter the presentation I give, I always find this is such a crucial piece of understanding the world of Alzheimer's disease in our community, how it affects people. And I always want to explain, that difference between Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Often people will say, oh, my mom doesn't have Alzheimer's, she has dementia, or my mom doesn't have dementia, she has Alzheimer's disease. Well, what's the difference between the two? So when we look at this world of dementia, we look at it as an umbrella term. And dementia itself is not a normal part of aging. We all should be able to live to our late 90s, early hundreds with clear cognition and without any cognitive deficits. But when those do happen, we need to address these and to not just sweep this under the rug. Again, Ayesha mentioned this in talking about this ageism that does exist. Often an 85-year-old woman can go into her doctor's office and explain that she is having memory problems, and they're just going to pretty much chalk her up to dementia and give her a prescription for a medication that might help with the symptoms. But it's not, again, it's not addressing the problems. They're looking at, well, this is a disease that mainly affects people in their older age. So if someone is 85, if someone is a woman, and she's experiencing these symptoms, well, then she must have Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. And so this is what we're going to prescribe and not do the medical care that is still necessary. So again, think about this word of dementia. It's characterized by problems with, thinking, judgment, reasoning, memory, language. I'm sure everyone here, if we were in the same room, I'd ask you to raise your hand, but how many people in here have lost your keys? You've misplaced your keys, right? You've gone into a room and you don't know why you went in that room, right? These are things that have all happened. You've forgotten where you parked your car. Well, this is normal. And this is often confusion that is caused by a wide variety of external stimuli that are happening, distractions that exist. So it's not that you have a problem with your memory. It's just you weren't paying attention in the first place. So that is the world of, age-related forgetfulness. But we also really look at this world of dementia. There are many biological causes of dementia. Sometimes they could just be dementia-type symptoms. Someone be on different medications that could cause this memory loss, confusion, poor judgment, but they don't have dementia or they don't have Alzheimer's disease because it was a medication interaction. So this is, again, why it's so crucial to get proper diagnosis and proper evaluations. And the world of Alzheimer's disease versus dementia, Alzheimer's is your most common form of dementia. So if you think of it as an umbrella, and underneath that umbrella or a piece of pie, Alzheimer's is that biggest piece of the pie of dementia. And when we think about the prevalence, it is the leading cause of neurodegenerative dementia. There are over 6 million Americans who currently have Alzheimer's disease. It is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States and 3rd here in California. Again, we're thinking about that California is a great place to age. the weather's nice. We don't have to worry about the snow. It's a lot kinder to older bones with arthritis. And more people live in California, you know, who are older adults. So we're also going to see this role. If Alzheimer's disease is a disease that mainly affects people over the age of 65, we're also going to realize that, you know, the cause of death number is going to be higher here in California. But we also know that we need these services and we need the support, either for the people themselves or for their caregivers. And the one thing about Alzheimer's, again, you see it on the bullet point here, the fifth one down, it's the only cause of death in the top 10 that can't be prevented, cured, or slowed down. And that's one that we're trying to do something about. You know, at the Easton Center, we're trying to change this course. We're trying to come up with medications, interventions that can actually slow down the course of this disease, can actually, you know, maybe reverse it. You know, wouldn't that be wonderful if one day that would be an option and a possibility? And then we see, especially in the past, 20 months that we've been looking at here, the world of COVID and that increase of people, how it has disproportionately affected people with Alzheimer's disease. The deaths of people with Alzheimer's and dementia has increased 16% during COVID time. You know, part of it is because at the very beginning of the pandemic, some of the nursing homes or the care facilities or the senior communities were the ones that were hit the hardest with cases of COVID. And we also see that these people have other health issues. They have other contributing factors as well. So we also have seen, and this has come across the board, I think Ayesha mentioned this, I think everybody has mentioned this so far, and it's really come out in the past, 2 years, it's talking about the race and gender health disparities. You know, we realize that, is it a matter of where somebody lives? Is it a matter of biological changes? What are these differences that cause the health disparities that do exist? So when we think about Alzheimer's disease, we realize that 2/3 of the people with Alzheimer's are women. We actually partner a lot with the Women's Alzheimer's movement to try to help raise awareness about this and what can we do. And also women are affected in 2 ways. One, more women have Alzheimer's disease, but also the other, the women are the caregivers, as has been mentioned earlier. Other 2 groups that are heavily impacted by Alzheimer's disease and other related dementias are the African Americans and the Latinx population. We see that these are 2 populations where their Alzheimer's numbers are much higher than the Caucasian white population. So African Americans are twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's disease, and the Latinx Hispanic population is 1.5 times as likely. They're also both less likely to get proper evaluation and proper diagnosis. So again, we're looking at this larger issue, as Dr. Torres Gill was saying, about this new population, this new age of people who live in the United States. And actually, I think it's brilliant how he said that he's doing some shifting in his own life to focusing on children, because that's one thing where we can see interventions that can happen now for people when they're younger to affect and to change the way that a population ages. This slide is one of those slides that exactly talks about this. This is from the Lancet Commission on Dementia Prevention, Intervention, and Care. The first version of this study came out in, oh my gosh, I think 2019, if I'm not mistaken, which I might be mistaken. So forgive me on that one. Do not hold me to that exact year. But this study came out, came out of USC, where we realized that 35% of dementia risk is in fact modifiable. So looking at years of education under the age of 18. So talking about what Dr. Torres Gill is doing, focusing on children. This is an area where 7% of your dementia risk is established before you're 18 years old, based upon your education, based upon your access to education, the quality of your education. You're in midlife, between the years of 45 and 65, So this population, according to this study, this isn't the old group yet, you know, not like Paul's students who consider the 45-year-olds ready to be old. So this is still considered midlife, according to this study, is that we see in that population, hearing loss accounts for 8% of your dementia risk, traumatic brain injury, which makes sense, 3%, high blood pressure is 2%. The inclusion of alcohol is actually new for the 2020 version of this study that was released, and obesity as well. And then if you think about it, when somebody is 65 and under, how many of them are really thinking about their dementia risk? I think probably not that many, unless they have it actually in their families. But otherwise, people don't think about it. So we see here that this world, so much of your dementia risk is actually before the age of 65, which is modifiable. After the age of 65, you know, smoking, depression, social isolation, again, things that really stepped up a lot in the past 20 months. Physical inactivity plays a big role. Air pollution, again, that's also a new addition to this. And then looking at somebody and their diabetes, you know, if it's controlled, if it's not, if they're able to reduce the risk of diabetes and also to put it under control. So we're seeing these modifiable risk factors. By changing these, we're able to provide a healthier older adult population where you know, we think about the resources, think about the financial resources that are given to a person with dementia in terms of the medical care. We're also looking at the world of, we want quality of life, right? I don't think we necessarily want, you know, quantity. I think we just want quality. I'd be happy to, you know, to live a healthy life for the majority of my life and have that life be shorter than it to be, you know, a sick life where, you know, we have dementia early on and, you know, you might live longer, but at what quality of life? So lots of research is looking at this world of modifiable risks. How can we change our risks? What can we do on a daily basis to adjust our own future in terms of our cognitive health? When we also look at the world of one of the reasons why we do this community education, why we go out into our communities, is we realize that so many of these people with dementia, 61%, they're actually living in our community. They're our neighbors. They live across the street from us. You know, they go to our churches, our synagogues. They go to the same school where your grandchildren or your children may go. And so we realize that it's community. It's not so much in facilities or nursing homes or retirement centers. They're living next door to us. So we see this world of making sure that we go into the community to talk to people, to educate them about dementia, to educate about dementia risk as well. We look at the 11+ million family caregivers. Primary care, the typical caregiver is a woman in her 40s who has children at home and who's also caring for a parent. So we try to bring that information in to these families about resources, about services that exist, and also talking about education about the disease itself. Is it dementia? Is it Alzheimer's dementia? Is it vascular dementia? Is it frontal temporal dementia? Is it Lewy body dementia? They're all different. They all have different progressions. And some are more, you can change the course of the disease by living a healthy lifestyle, more of a brain healthy lifestyle, reducing your risk of stroke or heart attack. But then others, you know, those interventions don't work as well. So again, we're looking at this disease education, reaching people into the community, because this is where family caregivers are. This is where people who have dementia truly live. When we think about the other arm of, you know, the future of aging, you know, this landscape that we're talking about today, you know, we want medication. We want to be able to change the course of this disease or of these diseases. And, you know, we're looking at different ways to modify the therapies that actually exist so that they change the course of the disease. Currently, the majority of the treatments that are available help with symptoms. They're symptomatic. They do not actually change the course of the disease. So, with Alzheimer's disease, and, I think all of us, we could all give, an hour, 2-hour long presentations talking about some of the subjects that we're touching on today. But when we think about, so this little bit gets sciencey very quickly, but very surface level for everybody. I'm talking about this amyloid plaques and these neurofibrillary tangles, which are the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. And currently, most of the disease modifying treatments are targeting those amyloid plaques. This is what we're looking for. We want to try to prevent or reduce the formation of these. And if they're there already, then we want to take them out. We want to get rid of these and hope that that can improve cognition as well, and also long-term cognition. We also are looking at treatments that reduce those neurofibrillary tangles, that tau in the brain that also sort of tangles up the neurons and causes death in the brain of these neurons. We're also looking at some neuroprotective strategies. So is this healthy lifestyles? What other ways can we intervene? Here at UCLA, we have, as part of the Easton Center, we have some really great clinical trials that we are looking at that are disease modifying, where there's actual interventions. And then we have some where they're longitudinal and where we're trying to study people and learn more. We want to learn more about this. We want to learn about people with early onset Alzheimer's. Why does someone develop it at 52 and not 82? What is it about their genetics? What is it about the form of dementia that they have that causes it to be more aggressive in that way? And then we also have just the opportunity for people to participate, to be there, to be engaged, whether it's now or whether it's down the road with our potential participant pool, looking at ways to find more information and realizing we are such a resource-rich community here at UCLA that we're honored to be able to be a part of, and knowing that we have people who can really help change the course of this disease. When we talk about clinical trials, the majority of the research that has been done on Alzheimer's disease medications, or truthfully, most medications, has been done on white males. Women and minorities are vastly underrepresented in research and clinical trials. And we want to make sure that medication works for everybody, right? We don't want it just to affect the work in the population that was studied. So we really are trying to, a strong part of recruitment of different populations, African-American population, the Latinx population, and women here in Los Angeles, realizing that this role of race, gender, and ethnicity is important. And especially when finding safe and effective use of therapies that can help change the course of this disease. This is our contact information in case anyone has any questions, and that is my email down at the bottom. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'd be happy to be able to be a resource. And again, I look forward to the dialogue at the end. I know some questions have come up in the chat, so I look forward to being able to have a greater discussion about all of this later. So thank you so much for allowing me to be able to be a part of this day.
Thank you so much, Monica. I'm sorry to rush us on to the next presenter, but I do want to make sure we have time for some of that dialogue, because it has been interesting, though, to see the internal dialogue between attendees within the chat window. So thank you, Monica, for your presentation very much. And I'm going to introduce Deanne Morris. She is the Associate Director of the UCLA Generation Exchange Program. And I'm going to tell you a little bit, sorry, excuse me 1 second. Having some trouble with my technology, but let me go ahead and tell you about Deanne while I get that set up. Deanne is the Associate Director of the Generation Exchange Program and the Program Director, Community Outreach for the UCLA Clinical and Translational Science Institute's Community Engagement and Research Program. So much of her work has focused on this community outreach initiative and coordinating community partnerships. Her extensive involvement in CBPR, community-based participatory research, has led to strong partnerships in high-risk communities and the creation of innovative approaches to tackling health barriers and disparities. She has collaborated with healthcare agencies, government authorities, and CBOs to support these various community efforts. And I'm going to let her tell you more about the Generation X program as soon as I get this pulled up. And Deanne also has a master's in public administration. So Deanne, here we go. Can everyone see that? All right, I will pass the mic to you then. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here this afternoon. And I feel like, what can I even offer? You guys have given out so much wonderful, great information about the aging population. So I'm going to give you a little bit about the story that I have about Generation Xchange. And Generation is a program that I've been doing through UCLA about 7 years. It started when someone introduced me to someone from UCLA Department of Geriatrics, so Dr. Teresa Seaman, and she told me about a program that she had worked on in Baltimore, where they put seniors into elementary schools, grades K through third, to work with students that were having behavior problems, students that were falling behind in, say, math or reading. So I got a chance, they sent me to Baltimore to look at the program, and I was so excited. I said, well, this is something we need here, because it's twofold. One, that our seniors, something for our seniors to keep them busy, keep their cognitive skills up and sharp, and also for the little people to learn the wisdom that the seniors bring to them, but then also for them to be able to get the assistance that they can, because a teacher with a classroom of 30 kids, and you got 5 that just cannot keep up, they need help. So we took on a program that was started by AARP called Experimental Core. When we started here in LA, I named it the Generation Xchange program. And it's an intergenerational program that everybody's been talking about, different types of programs. But it benefits both, like I said, the child and the adults. And we are recruit volunteers from within the community. We're currently at 6 schools. And what we have established, we have 10 volunteers at each school. And they work in the classroom one-on-one with the students around reading, math, or whatever that child might need. We know a lot of our students are passed on and are not ready to go to the next grade. So they will interrupt the class because they don't have the world, they can't keep up with the rest of the class. So what our seniors do, they actually do hands-on, one-on-one. Sometimes they do 2 to 3 students at a time. So whatever that student needs, wherever they are. So we kind of work with the students where they are. And our students love our GenX volunteers because we recruit people that are 50 and over, but they bring something to the table. So they're not the mother, grandmother, the teacher, the guardian. It's kind of like having a new best friend. And, one of the things I remember my mother used to do when you acted up, they gave you the look. So these volunteers, because they're seniors, they will give you that look. And the kids, some of them would ask you, why are you looking at me funny? Why are you looking at me with your eyes? And they eventually learn that means that you need to stop, be quiet, and pay attention, So they get to teach. But also the volunteers not only help the students, we have a lot of brand new teachers that have no experience in community engagement, but they're put into schools in areas where students, like the students that we work with at all 6 of our schools, 40% of the students are foster care or from group homes. So they come to the school with challenges. So our volunteers are able to work through that. I mean, they have experience, they've been around for a long time. You can go to the next slide. And our results have been where we have improved behavior, because at one time I could go to a school and there would be 12 students, mostly boys, special ed. Once they get in special ed, they never get out. And that was something I wanted to stop. So what has happened that we, being in the classroom with the students and helping the teacher, we're able to make sure that some of those behaviors that were happening are no longer happening since we're in the classroom. Our volunteers put in a minimum of 10 hours a week, and that's what's required. None of them do 10, all of them do 15 to say 20 hours a week. We pay them a stipend, not a salary, just so that they have a little chump change, but it's a thank you from us that we appreciate what they're doing. One of the things, again, prior to COVID, adults improved their walking speed, weight loss, and there's a lot of them were not on diets, lower blood pressure. Our volunteers, racked up over 17,000 hours, the total. And one of the things that the teachers just appreciate having some extra eyes and hands in the classroom to assist them. And in the picture there, you see a couple of our volunteers there working with some of the students. One of the things that we did, go to the next slide. Some of the benefits that have changed when everyone has been talking about when a person retires, what do they do? How do they get involved? And I always tell, I talk to our volunteers, most volunteers, when they retire, they had, I call work families. So when you leave your job, you had people that you went to happy hour with, you went to lunch and brunch and showers and birthday parties. But when you leave that group and you go home, if you don't have a family or kids in the same city with you or people that you associate with, you don't have those same friends anymore. So your life kind of changes. So what we're able to do with our program is introduce our volunteers to other things to keeping them engaged. So they have developed relationships with each other. Women that never knew each other have become best friends over the last 7 years or more. And, they play bridge together, they go out, and this is a lot, they did a lot more before this, but, luncheon and parties or whatever, they did a lot of things together. And that kind of changed, but we pivot, and I'll talk about that and what we did after when the pandemic came. But they also integrated within the school. So the school makes them part of the school family. So not only do they have a family with their volunteer peers, but also the teachers and every administrators of each of the schools that they're at. And they develop such strong relationships that a teacher and a principal threaten me if I say I need to move a volunteer to another school because we need some help someplace else. So the ties are very strong in the classrooms and personal life of all of our volunteers. I've watched them change the way they dress, the way they act, their hairstyles, just because they felt their whole self-esteem and where they never smiled, they smile, they laugh because they're engaging and it gives them something to do. So it keeps that brain constantly moving all the time. 2018, 2 of our volunteers had been working together maybe 3 or 4 years and they got married. I tell people that I can't guarantee that you will find a husband or a wife there at in the program. Next slide. So we had to pivot and make some real changes when COVID hit, because when COVID hit, we were actually in the classrooms and we're in the classrooms between 8 and 3 when the students are in school. So we had to figure out, so what do we do to continue to do the work and keeping our, not only our commitment to the students, but how do we keep the commitment to our volunteers to keep them engaged? So we had to quickly go into Zooming mode, which everybody's aware of now. But we're working with seniors that some of them had flip phones, some of them had phones that I don't even remember that they sold them. And we had to figure out, so what are we going to do? So we found some folks that donated laptops to us, and we were able to train our 60 volunteers on Zoom. It was a challenge, I'll say that, because some of them had never touched a computer, didn't know how to turn on a computer, you know. So it took a lot of patience. And our keywords with Generation Xchange is patience and flexibility. So we got through that. But every time we had to do something different. So part of the training, we used to have 5-day, 8-hour day training in person. So even that training that we had to rewrite our own training manuals for the staff to be able to do a Zoom training with volunteers. So you got 60 people online that have to keep up with what you're doing. But we made it through. And one of the things, when the students were able to see their same volunteers come back online with them, because remember, all students across LA Unified were on Zoom now. So our volunteers were able to work with the students still one-on-one. The teachers would put them in breakout rooms. So we taught them how to do breakout rooms, how to share their books, how to share files. They assist teachers from grading papers to just being able to mute a child if they were just acting up. Our volunteers, they still to this day, they miss the one-on-one, the physical piece of being in a classroom with the students, but they did a wonderful job of adjusting this last year and a half. So then we said, well, we know COVID's going to end, but let's see what's going to happen with the schools, where things, even as of this year, changed a little, but not much. So our classrooms, we still have some volunteers that are actually back in the classroom physically every day in a couple of the schools. Some volunteers are still working with students via Zoom. And then we have decided to come up with the third pivot project, where we're setting up what we call remote classroom learning centers. So we're purchasing large monitors, iPad, and headphones so that we can work in the classroom in an isolated area, stay in the back of the class, stay with 2 or 3 students at a time while the teacher is in the front of the class being able to teach. And this way we can still give that one-on-one that we were giving. Also, in some schools, we have set up isolated classrooms that is still monitored by a licensed LA Unified staff person, but we might put 3 volunteers in a classroom and sit 1 or 2 students at a time in there, so that our volunteers are not with the 35 kids in a small classroom. At least they're in a room just with maybe 3 or 4 adults and maybe 6 kids or something at a time. And that was something that we had to do to try to continue to do the work that we do, because we know during COVID, some of our students, they fell behind because they weren't used to Zoom. Think of somebody that has a kid that's in kindergarten that they never knew how to sit down, be still, pay attention, focus, because they're kinder. They never even been in a classroom. So they start their school year on Zoom. So you can imagine how challenging that was for the teachers and the volunteers teaching kinders how to sit, be still, don't move, be quiet, pay attention. What did I just say? And they were playing with their dogs and their toys and their brothers and sisters. So, we worked through all that, we kind of got through it. So we're just still trying to figure out how to work in the new life of COVID. But just as even yesterday, one of my volunteers told me about how thankful he was to me for making sure that we continue to do the work. And he talked about mental health and how that last year and a half, if he had not had the opportunity to work with his kids still on Zoom, he didn't know what he would have did, because he was prior to joining, working with me, he was just sitting at home. He'd get up at 12 o'clock in the day, didn't have anything to do. His mother had just passed, that he was a retired fireman, took care of his mother passed, and he was just at home. His kids are grown and live in different estate. So we know that, you know, engagement, keeping our volunteers active and happy. And you can see all these smiles on this picture here of some of our volunteers. They are very passionate. And so we try to recruit people that are passionate about what they do, recruit people, seniors that are passionate about the work. We've had a couple, I have 2 volunteers that are part of our team that retired from UCLA. So we have volunteers from every walk of life as far as their backgrounds. And we always tell volunteers, you don't have to have kids to be able to work with kids. You just have to have a passion and want to be able to give back and to make a difference in the lives of the little people.
Thank you so much, Deanne. I think that there's a lot of similarities between our programs and in terms of the value it gives to the volunteers and the people who participate in them as much as it does to the children that they help.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know we're out of time, but I'm going to quickly go through my presentation and ask that you all give me a few more minutes and stick around as long as you can. So I wanted to go last because I believe that I kind of can connect a lot of the things that we've been talking about, because there are several common themes between our presentations, the themes of health and intergenerational programming, or, you know, connecting generations, and the importance of investing in the younger generations for the future as well. So what I want to tell you about is my program, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at UCLA. It is a lifelong learning program for people over 50, so non-credit courses, activities, volunteer opportunities, and things like that. I'll quickly tell you a little bit about my background. I have been teaching now for 17 years, as well as being in administration in different education settings. I'm originally from the DC area, so I have actually also worked a little bit for the federal government with communications and strategic planning for the National Guard. So even in that position, though, education was a key part of what I was doing. So I'm very passionate about education, and for reasons that go beyond just personal fulfillment, for reasons that touch on our health and well-being as a society. So our Osher program, we call it Osher and OLLI. We change up the name every now and then, but it is a program that is funded in part by the Osher Foundation. And so there are actually 124 of these institutes nationwide at different institutes of higher ed. And each one is a little different. At ours, we offer a variety of seminars, courses, events, leadership opportunities, all for our members who pay an annual fee to join, and of course must be over 50. We like to say we have no tests, no grades, just learning for the sheer joy of learning. I'm not going to read this whole quote, but I do want to just note that, you know, supporting aging and older adults is a social justice issue, and we have touched on that. Dr. Torres Gill has touched on that. I do want to give some context to the science I'm going to present by discussing aging and loneliness. Loneliness occurs when you have a lack of a support system, or you lose a support system. So sometimes for older adults, as Deanne mentioned, when they retire, they lose that work family, that work support system. It could be a collective loneliness they feel because of that. If they're away from their family, their children go up and they've moved away, you lose that support system as well. We had a Osher member who told me once, you know, everybody used to call me Dr. Joe, and no one calls me that now that I've retired. And I spent my whole life being called Dr. Joe, and now I'm just Joe. And that was a really touching story to hear, because I hadn't thought about things like that before, how, you know, you lose so much of your identity when you stop working. So I'm going to share a little bit of research from Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, who was the 2009 Nobel Prize winner in physiology. And she was actually supported by the Osher Foundation she's one of 2 individuals who have won Nobel Prizes who have been supported by the Osher Foundation to conduct research in these fields of aging and health. And what she talks about is something called the telomere effect. And I hope that you all understand that the telomere effect is something that I think connects to all the things that we've discussed today. So I hope that that becomes clear to you as well as I go through this. But if I go too quickly, please let me know because I'm sorry to rush. So telomeres are actually these parts of the chromosome at the end. They cap our chromosomes and they prevent degradation. So as we get older, these caps, they gradually wear over time. And as the telomeres wear down, there can be problems as a result with replication stress, oxidation, things that can lead to diseases and aging-related issues. So Dr. Blackburn is trying to understand telomeres, conducted research on telomeres in a variety of organisms because all living organisms, even pond scum, have telomeres. So when they looked at this, several different studies that were analyzed. This one was a 100,000 person study from Kaiser Permanente. You can see that as we get older, on average, our telomeres get shorter. And as telomeres get shorter, there's a statistical relationship between telomere shortness and mortality. So as they get shorter, we have impaired immune function. Cancers have been associated sometimes with shorter telomeres, diseases, diabetes, even dementias. So the shorter the telomere, the higher the mortality rate. And Dr. Blackburn's research goes into far more detail about all the different ways they verified. If you take out other factors, that's still true, yes. So regardless of other causes of mortality, there is a common thread here that as telomeres get shorter, mortality rate goes up, or the likelihood of mortality increases. And so why does this matter? Well, another study on telomeres has to do with depression in people who have bladder cancer. So these individuals, some of them have shorter telomeres than others, some of them have longer telomeres than others. So they looked at the participants in this study, and after 2.5 years, those who had passed away, who only had depression or only had short telomeres, or neither, were just a small group of those who's passed. 5 years, which is the standard to kind of evaluate this sort of data, there were some more deaths from, again, people who were either only depressed or only had short telomeres. So just because they were depressed, it doesn't necessarily mean that they had the short telomeres. But we're going to see how those two things relate. Because when we look at after 5 years, who died, who had short telomeres as well as depression, all of those individuals had passed away. So I think this is really telling because it shows that there is a genetic, a cellular level that we sometimes can't control, but also things like our mental health can affect that as well. Because again, if you have depression and the shorter telomeres, those statistics change significantly. And things that affect telomere maintenance. To retain your telomeres, education has been proven to improve telomere retention. And by education means being involved in a learning atmosphere, keeping your mind stimulated, learning new things. That also goes hand in hand with resiliency. And with resiliency comes, exercise, good sleep schedules, understanding stress reduction mechanisms, and having social support. So these are all things that we've touched on already in each of our individual presentations in some way or another. And at the same time, telomere attrition, it can be attributed to chronic stress, which is in all caps because that's one of the most major things that can cause telomere attrition. Depression, prenatal stress. They found that pregnant women who have prenatal stress, their babies are born with shorter telomeres than their parents had or that they should have had at birth. Childhood trauma, abuse, neighborhood disorder, environmental pollutants, tobacco use, poor diet, and obesity. And we know from much of the research that's going on with equity and social justice that a lot of these factors that relate to telomere attrition are also linked to socioeconomic status and the environment in which you grow up, which may not be in your control. So then this becomes a question of equity. Your telomeres become shorter depending on how many of these stress factors you have. And so certain groups of people may be advantaged in a way where they can avoid those stressors and certain groups may not. One of the other interesting things about telomeres is that they are affected by our relationships. So that social mental health component makes a significant difference. Even married couples begin to have telomeres that are similar to one another's as they are together longer. So that social support is a really big factor in this science of our cells and how they maintain themselves and our mortality and our lifespan. So the way that this connects to what we do at the Osher Institute, not only are we providing education, but we're also providing peer-to-peer social connections through this community of lifelong learners. And community is a theme that has been present throughout all of our presentations today as well. It's such an important thing because social connections are the most effective, efficient mechanisms to foster a sense of belonging. And with these studies, I was looking at sense of belonging to an institution. So when you become friends with someone in our program, you feel like you're part of the UCLA community. Social connections decrease feelings of loneliness, they lower stress levels, they improve mental, physical health, increase overall life satisfaction. And this sense of belonging is the most significant factor actually in predicting resilience, which we saw earlier was a way to maintain your telomeres. Not going to go into this slide too much, it's just a little bit more information about friendship and how friendships support our life and our well-being. As we say, birds of a feather flock together. There's actually a term for that, homophily, and it tells you that people with similar characteristics or interests will form ties at a higher rate. So when you have a program, and it could be our program of the Lifelong Learning Institute, or it could be any of these programs at UCLA, when you engage in a program like this, you're going to be around like-minded individuals because they're also interested in that environment or what it is you get out of participation in that program. So when you join a program like this, there is already a greater likelihood that you're going to make friends and you're going to find connections and you're going to feel more fulfilled. And just to kind of connect to where we are at these days, digital connections, why do they matter? Well, research shows that digital exchanges are actually a significant part of friendship making these days. And why is that? Because even if you were resistant to technology before the pandemic, we use our phones and we rely on technology for the ability to quickly and easily touch base with one another, to vent to one another. Younger students do a lot of this with just like sending each other texts when they're just want to complain about a class or a teacher or an assignment, or to send each other funny pictures, memes, videos. A lot of us do this now, right? We see something we like and we send it to someone. And those tiny exchanges digitally are significant. And so what we've had to do is we've had to pivot a lot during the pandemic to find ways to support our community, to stay in touch with one another, to provide opportunities to connect, to suggest ways that teachers can engage their audiences more in the classroom through a digital platform, because that's not going to go away. It's always going to be an option, and it's always going to be a need to have that digital platform going forward, because we can serve people we couldn't without that platform. So that's my quick recap. The Osher Lifelong Learning Institute is one of the best places I've had the opportunity to work, and I'm so grateful because similar to how Deanne feels about her volunteers, we get to hear all the time from our members, this program changed my life, this program saved my life, this program brought me joy, especially during the pandemic. I don't know what I would do without this program. So there are significant health benefits, mental health, physical health, cellular health benefits that come when you're part of a community that are increase when that community focuses on education and learning. And so today was really special and meaningful to me as well, that we could all gather and share what we're doing, because everything we're doing is connected. And so thank you so much for giving me that time. I'm going to share some questions, and if any panelists can stick around a few more minutes, we'll discuss for as long as we can. And I think I will start with a question that we posed at the beginning, is how do we break down barriers? That was Aisha's question. What can we do? And I'll share some of the topics that came up in the chat that relate to this question. Someone asking, how do we break down barriers for companies who think they should lay off older workers? How do we break down barriers for younger students who, like the okay boomer trend that came around? How do we break down barriers with ageism in the media? How do we break down barriers with ageism, another one mentioned, in the workforce? So I will let whoever would like to begin start that conversation.
Yeah, so I mean, these barriers are just kind of things that have been traditional language, or kind of something maybe didn't start out as a harmful thing because it is the baby boomer generation, but then it became a negative thing when people are like, oh, well, so-and-so can't do this, thanks boomer. And I don't know where that meme started, or that joke, but how do we reverse the narrative and kind of take ownership back of that being just a definition of a generational cohort and not a way to insult someone? So I don't know if anyone in the chat wants to make a comment, but I did see a few things about redefining aging and kind of how to do that.
I think this also, this also really speaks to the world of like Deanne's work and Paul's work, is creating that intergenerational relationship. Because if you think about it, so many people nowadays live away from elder family members. And they don't, like, if you think of a millennial, that population, how many people do they have in their lives, in their active daily life, are over the age of 60, over the age of 70. So by creating these relationships, these intergenerational programs, right away, we're helping to sort of change that conversation. We're helping to shift it, because we're now making it be like, oh, that's no longer a boomer. Oh, that's Susan. And it's like, there's now a name to this. It's no longer a mystical population.
One of the things I think it's important is that we actually talk to the community that we're working in. So if we want to work with older adults, we have to engage them in conversation and talk to them and ask them, what do you want to see? What do you want to see in your community? Or how would you approach this? And most of the time they design stuff around for seniors without even asking them, do they want it? And then they get mad because the seniors don't participate, or they don't come to that senior center, And the first thing they'll say, well, Deanne, nobody asked me, So we make sure that we, from the day one, that we have always engaged the volunteers. And they don't want to be called old. I mean, they're jazzy. And like I tell them, my white hair came from, it's all wisdom, it's not age. So, but you have little kids that tell you, why do you have gray hair? Or do you have teeth like my grandmother? Like, what does that mean? Do you put them in a jar? So you got to have a strong, demeanor, because little kids will tell you the truth and they'll ask you anything, but that's what makes them keep going. That's what makes our volunteers or our seniors just in general survive. And we're all in survival mode right now, and where folks might have been having mental health issues. And that's one of the things that we don't talk about a lot because there's stigma in certain communities about it, but it's real. And we got to be able to bring them outside that house. I know we talk about someone saying how, you go into the community, so you don't know what's happening behind that door, but you have so many seniors that want to come out. They don't know how, or because people stigmatize them, or they're telling them, well, you're too old, you can't do this. We have to learn how to better communicate with with our population.
Yeah.
Just two. Okay, I'm sorry.
No,
go ahead.
go ahead. Go.
Just two quick thoughts. I just wanted to say, I think I know that from the service learning program, our students do come back and say, my gosh, I didn't realize that older adults were so heterogeneous, because they just think of them as this, it's an elderly person, as you mentioned, it's a cohort. But now, I think as Monica mentioned, now they have a name, they have a face, someone they've actually spoken to and gotten to know a little bit better. And so I think that's definitely one of the takeaways. If we can increase that kind of engagement, then hopefully there's less of the stereotyping, and then I think Beth mentioned that it goes both ways too, older adults or even a Generation X like myself, I catch myself, oh my gosh, you guys have it so easy. We used to have to use slides, in person and take notes. And now, students get upset if I don't post the slides for them. And, it's just little things like that I have to kind of check myself too. So it goes both ways. It goes both ways.
That's
we were considered slackers.
Over 40. That's what happens when you're old and over 40.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, we were considered slackers. That's all I was going to say. That was our generation, or Generation X. And I don't know how many Gen Xers are in the audience, but I think we turned out okay.
I think I'm going to echo what my colleagues are saying here about the intergenerational programming piece. I didn't mention it, but we work with the cluster program with Paul. And we have some volunteer programs, and I want to find more ways to connect with the different opportunities we have for intergenerational programming on campus. So Deanne's program has been around for quite some time, but we want to have more. We want to do more things like this. And I think that one of the important things to go back to the question of how do we change that perception? How do we break barriers? Someone asked about the workforce. I think that digital and media component is important. So the media part of this, especially social media as well, is interesting, because I was talking to some colleagues the other day about how social media has broken down barriers of racial and ethnic barriers, where people who are teenagers especially, they're all doing the same TikTok dances from different countries, but they're all doing it, and they're feeling bonded and connected to people that are from a whole different environment and different culture. And I think that the same thing with social media and media in general can occur for older adults. You're seeing more older adults on TikTok, or younger people taking videos of them and putting them on Facebook and things like that. And so when you find things that you can relate to one another on, that's a key part of that friendship making research I quickly glanced over, but it's all about relatability. If you find things in common with someone, you instantly feel comfortable with them. You instantly feel like you have the same values, like you're bonded, especially sense of humor. That seems to be the strongest one. So I think that when you have more films where older adults are not portrayed in a stereotypical background character kind of way, when they're the main character, and you see parts of yourself in that main character, regardless of their age, then you feel more connected. So for me, I think that that's a huge component, is the media and the way that we relate to one another, finding points of relatability.
And just to touch on that point, and I think I went way too long on my slides, so I'm sorry we're over this afternoon, but I talked about the negative components of ageism, but there have been some positive ones recently with the movie Minari was showing how an older generation kind of brought together the farm or whatnot. And also Frankie and Grace is another TV show that has two leading ladies that are older. And prior to that, I don't think there was a leading older televised group before Golden Girls. So it's really interesting. And then I think they were in their 50s or 40s, but they were supposed to be playing 70-year-olds or something. So it has been a slow shift. And I know there's other projects and research that is going on at the USC Davis School with the film department, talking about the silvering of media or the silvering of Hollywood, because there has been a shift with getting more of those leading roles where they are strong, independent characters, and they're not just, an old person that's demented or something like that. So it's a slow progress, but it's happening.
I think we have a, thank you, Aisha. We have a question that I think Monica, maybe you would be best to start us with that answer. It's about changing and shifting these perceptions for the health field. So even doctors not making or treating, you know, older adults a little bit more equitably. How do you think we can change that culture?
You know, that's such a good question. It's such a complex level, because when you really think about it, it's from many different levels. It's, you know, from that front desk person who is giving the instructions or, you know, checking in patients, to the medical professionals as well. You know, some of the work that we have done is actually helping to educate clinicians about memory loss and aging and dementia, so they know what's normal and what's not, so they don't just like categorize and push off. And also realizing that just because someone might be older doesn't mean that they can't understand. Like, you don't need to yell at them. You just need to slow down. And, you know, I think we all go to doctors and we have 7 minutes and they're in and out, and it's so fast. So it's really trying to do a continuing education for our clinicians as well as for their staff to realize that as we age, we slow down, but it doesn't mean that we get dumb. It's just that we slow down our thinking, our remembering, our reactions. That's all just part of basic aging. So trying to really do that larger education, but how do you do that? You know, doctors are so busy. You know, they have to do their CEUs, they have to do their stuff. And do they have time for a program like this? You know, I don't know. It's definitely, it's a greater issue, and on so many levels of trying to bring in sort of like destigmatize aging for the medical professionals.
One of the things that when as part of our training, we try to do training all through the year, we teach our volunteers to be advocates for themselves, because a lot of times, if you don't have someone that can help you navigate your doctor's appointments, or your doctor visits, you have to be able to do that. So we tell them, write down all the things that you want to talk with your doctor, because they're going to come in that 7 minutes, and they're going to, if you wrote down, if you say, well, I'm coming in for a headache, they don't want to hear about anything else, because you want to tell them about my toe hurt, my nail hurt, they don't want to hear that. So if you write down the things and prioritize them, at least when you go on with a list, you can say, doctor, I have 4 things that I need to discuss with you. So these are the 4 things I need to talk about. But a lot of people don't have advocates. They don't have anybody that can go to that doctor's appointment with them. You know, I had to be my parents' advocate, because they would come back and I would say, what's the doctor say? She says nothing, it's old age. Everything is not old age. I think somebody mentioned that earlier. Everything is not related to old age. So I had to start going to the doctor's appointment, and they realized that, okay, this daughter, she got a little sense. So they started treating them, you know, like I shouldn't have to give them a list and tell them, you need to give this x-ray or do that. But because everybody doesn't have that, or have someone that can go with them, or they can give them directions, even when they try to make an appointment to talk to a triage nurse over the telephone, teaching them how to be advocates for themselves. So I think that's very important. And whatever we can tell them, and in any group, and that goes across the board. And then we got to work with our politicians. You know, we have to make political change when we talk about folks losing their jobs because of age, or being shifted around because, well, they can't do that, or they want to save some money, so they're going to bring the young person, they can pay them less money, but with no skills. But then you want the older person to teach them how to do the job. So that's what you hear out there. You know, you want them to train them, but you don't want to pay them, you know. So how do we get our politicians that we vote for in our communities to step up to the plate and just support the work that we're all doing, because it's important to be able to make a difference. How do we make change? But we need support ongoing. And just one more last thing, we talked about the Zooming. All of our volunteers now, you know, they Zoom with their families, so because they couldn't go down south or to the East Coast or West Coast to visit anymore. So now they have weekly and monthly Zoom. They've had all kinds of birthday parties on Zoom because they couldn't get to the 100-year-old grandmother, great-grandmother, something. So, you know, people complain. On one hand, it has been a blessing for so many because some folks had not been out the house anyway, but now they have a tool where they can still communicate with their family and loved ones right in their own home. So.
So any other questions for the panel? I think we might wrap things up because we went over. But I think it's the title of this panel, the Aging Landscape, Emerging Trends and Changing Perspectives. I think that title was a key indicator of the change that is happening in our society right now. We have many different countries around the world that are facing larger, older populations. And so things are going to constantly be changing and evolving. And I'm so grateful and thankful to this panel for coming together. I wish Dr. Torres could have stayed, but of course we'll thank him virtually from here. And please feel free, students, observers, to share any questions you have. You can contact the Osher email and I can field them to the right people, osher@uclaextension.edu. I'd also like to thank UCLA Extension for creating this UCLA Open program and putting us all here together and supporting us, as well as Marianne Wilson, who has been behind the scenes doing all the webinar things tech-wise. So thank you to everybody. Again, I am so humbled and honored and grateful for this group of people to come together. And I hope we can do this again next year. And first time, always tricky, but I'm so happy that most of you were able to stay till the end. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for staying with us. Bye-bye.